of the things I always, maybe I looked into it too much, and I wonder if you did too, about Back to the Future. So, you look at the first movie, and when Marty McFly travels back in time to his parents when in the 50s, right? Or was it 60s?
1955.
50, yeah, 55. And if time, and this is like me looking into it way too much. I know it's a film, right? But from the science perspective, if there is time traveling, then shouldn't there be another Marty McFly already there when he's traveling back? And you know what I mean?
Yeah. So Bob calls that the ripple effect. Yeah. So a lot of people say, well, when in part two, when Marty and Doc leave 1985 and go to 2015, Marty sees himself as an old man. He should not exist in 2015 as an old man because he has skipped those 30 years. But Bob's time travel theory suggests that that is the ripple effect of him having gone there and successfully traveling back to his own time in place and time. So the fact that we see him as an old man just means that he successfully got back in time, back to the future, back to his original timeline, and that he was able to live through those years to be an old man. So I don't explain it nearly as well as Bob does. So, but yeah, you would think that scientifically, and a lot of people bring that up, but Bob explains it that the fact that he is seen as an old man means that he successfully does get back to his own timeline and lives out those 30 years to be able to be an old man in 2015 when we see him. So,
which one of Back to the Future is your favorite?
People ask me that all the time.
A tough one, I know.
It is tough. I like all three of them for different reasons. I mean, the original, you can't deny that it is almost a perfect movie. But I see them as one long saga. So it kind of irks me when some of the channels will air part one and part two, and then not air part three, or they'll air part three at the beginning and then part one and then part two, like they're doing it 1885, 1985, 2015. And I go, no. But no, it's one continuous saga for me. And so, if you ask any of the actors, they all have different reasons in which movies they like them. I'm really good friends with Tom Wilson, and Tom really enjoyed making part three the most, getting to ride horses and being a cowboy and just being able to do all the things he did, riding a horse and learning how to lasso and spinning his pistols and just being a cowboy. And so each one of them has a different answer as to which film. If they were in all three of them, they all have a different love for which one that they like the most. But yeah, for me, I think part two resonates with so many people because of the futuristic elements of it. We're 7 years beyond that year now. That was quite a surreal experience to live to that date and see how different the real 2015 turned out than what was the projected version of that back in the 80s. But
Jimmy Kimmel did a thing, right? I'm sure you saw it, the one with Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox.
Yes.
I think it was October 22nd, 2015 edition.
Yes.
Which was cool, what you just said. Like, a lot of the inventions that they said that would come out, flying cars, real hoverboards, come back. I really find it fascinating with Back to the Future, all three films, even though, and this is not to say that there wasn't any effort, of course there was, but the fact that it was so cleverly done with limited number of sets, if you think about it, part three was, just a small town, which they probably built, I'm sure.
They did. I mean, it was up in Sonora, California. It was it had been used in some other Westerns. They did, it was not, it was already an existing set. They had been used in some other films. oh, I'm drawing a blank on them now, but they're all Western type films. And they did build the clock tower there, and they, some other things that they had to build. But that set is completely gone. It burned down in the late 90s.
Oh, shoot.
Yes. The Back to the Future sets have been harmed by fire and lightning several times, which is interesting that lightning has started several fires. And so, there was back right after the Back to the Future ride came out in 91, I remember there was a fire on the back lot in Hollywood.
Right.
That was intentionally started by a disgruntled employee. But since then, 2008, there was a huge fire right down on that same set that destroyed a lot of the original recording masters for a lot of recording artists that was stored in a apparently in not a very safe location for these digital and analog recordings. But a lot of recordings were completely lost in the 2008 fire. And part of the Back to the Future set was destroyed. The clock tower has never been destroyed entirely on the original set, but the one out in Sonora, California, all of that burned down. None of that is there anymore. So
that's crazy, man. But going back to this, if you obviously there was the Hill Valley set, like from the first and the second, that was a major part of both the first and the second films. But then there was like the places where they lived, their homes.
Oh yeah.
Was that a real house in the first one?
That is a real house. And
it's still there?
It is still there. It's privately owned. I never published the address. There are other places that do, but I never publicly post anybody's private home address. But it is a real house, and fans almost on a daily basis trek up to Marty's the McFly house.
Oh wow!
Doc Brown's mansion is still there, and it is a public place. It is the Gamble House in Pasadena, California. I've been there, and you can actually go inside that house, and all the interior shots from the movie were not shot there, but the exteriors were.
Right.
And so all that was done on a set. But a lot of locations that you can go to, and I always encourage fans, if they're going to go, please be respectful of the homeowners and the people who actually live there. And the school, the Hill Valley High School, is a real high school you can go to. You can't go in without special permission, but I have been to that set. We did a tour back in October of 2015. There was a big fan convention called We're Going Back, and they had arranged a tour of the school. So I've been at the school. Mr. Strickland's house is really right around the corner from the school. You can actually walk past his house. There's just a lot, you can actually go to the mall, the Twin Pines Mall. The Lone Pine Mall is actually in City of Industry.
It's still there?
It's still there.
Have they renovated it a lot, or is it still the same?
There's been a lot of renovations. JCPenney is no longer the anchor store there. It's something else now, but it's very recognizable. You can go. I've been to the parking lot and walked around where the original time travel experiment happened. And so, and then of course the sets at Universal Studios. But there's a lot of different locations you can actually go to still today, and they are very recognizable, and fans from all over the world go to a lot of these, and the parking lot tends to have DeLoreans show up in the wee hours of the night, and so security will, if you're not careful, will run you out of the parking lot at the mall. But yeah, it's those are real surreal experiences to be able to go to these locations and so, okay, yeah, this is where the DeLorean traveled through time, or this is where Marty lived. This is where Doc Brown's house was. And so, yeah, very, very, really neat. I've not toured them all. California is quite a trek from Alabama. I've been there a few times, but every time I go, I never have enough time to spend to go do everything that I want to do. But I have been on a lot of those original locations and on the original back lot.
In terms of memorabilia, there's been so much, and I'm sure you know all of them. You know about all of them, and then you probably own all of them.
I've owned a lot of them. I've actually worked on a lot of them, and so that's one of the things that I have enjoyed doing as a subject matter expert, has been consulting with a lot of the toy manufacturers. And so
let me rephrase the question. What product do you enjoy as a fan the most, that you like, and which one you enjoyed working on the most?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, probably the most high profile one that I have worked on was almost a decade ago. It was 13. This was in 2013. Let's see if it'll come up. Let me get it.
Move it to there. You go. Okay, the Lego one. Yes.
The Lego.
Yes.
So this came out 9 years ago. Bob Gale and I both worked on that together for the Lego company. I wrote the instruction booklet that's inside of that. So Lego brought me in, and I did several test runs of putting it together and correcting some of the instructions on how to put it together. But I also wrote a lot of the dialogue, just a lot of the material that goes into the booklet.
Right.
So I enjoyed working on that. I did a lot of the promotion with Nike when the Nike mags were originally put out in 2011. So Nike brought me out to help promote that on the back lot at Universal Studios when they raised funds for the Michael J. Fox Foundation on eBay, and sold, I think, 1,500 pairs of shoes that made by Nike to mimic the exact thing that Michael wore in part 2. That was a fun promotion to work on. I'm currently working with a company called Dr. Collector that puts out prop replicas, and they're based in Spain. I've worked on a few things with them. I don't have one handy right in front. I should have grabbed one, but I've actually got the key. So here, I don't know if you can see this. This is actually a DeLorean key. And so nice. One of the concepts I came up with was making a replica of Doc Brown's keys for the DeLorean. And so that's a product that I resell on the website. And they kind of picked my brain, and what's something that's never come out before. And they were coming out with a prop kit. I don't have the prop kit. I'll get a few pieces. So like the out of time license plate, put them showing. Nope.
There you go. That's a perfect spot. Yeah.
So they came out with a memories kit that was like a collectible kit that Marty would have collected on his time travel adventures. And so it has a plutonium stick. It has all these, it has the clock tower flyer, a lot of different memorabilia, like a brochure on living in Hill Valley, a lot of things that they put together. And I worked on that with them, but they said, well, what's something that has never been put out? And I thought about it, and I thought, well, the keys to the DeLorean would be really cool. And so there's a little name tag that you do see in the film. Now, the actual keys in the film don't have the key fob, the black end on it, but the real DeLoreans did. So we went with that. And it's just a little nice $17 little prop replica that we sell on the website. That anytime I have worked on a product, I did a lot of work over 2 decades ago with Sunstar and Welly, which are both die-cast DeLorean manufacturers. And so I wrote the verbiage that went on the packaging of both of their products and helped design some of the packaging on those. And so it's fun now, 20 years later, to walk through and some collectible store and go, hey, there's one of the DeLoreans I worked on 20 years ago.
Nice. And
so that's kind of fun. Very surreal for me to see those out in the wild. I used to sell them. They're not manufactured anymore, but some of them are still. I was in Tennessee a few years ago on a trip with my family, and just stumbled into a little gift shop, and they had one of the DeLoreans
Oh,
on
nice.
the shelf, and I go, hey, and so, but that's a lot of fun to be involved in that aspect as a fan, because a lot of it, there's been a lot of materials, a lot of collectibles that have come out that fans would say, oh, that is horrible. They messed up Marty's face, or it's not accurate. The DeLorean doesn't have the right license plate on it, whatever it may be. And so I've enjoyed being the subject matter expert that some of these companies have consulted with to help them make it accurate. And so I've been very proud to be able to be that geek that they bring in as a reference guide and say, okay, help us with this. What tires should be on the DeLorean at this point in the film, or what license plate, and so I've enjoyed doing that. And so I'm kind of a silent resource in that area, where people who have these great collectibles on the shelves don't know that there were earlier editions of that had the wrong, had a Mr. Fusion that was too big, or whatever the case was, that had they not come to me, that those things would still be there today. And so I've enjoyed being kind of the guide to some of these manufacturers on collectibles. And so the collectible part of it has been really huge. And so, I've enjoyed collecting actual props from the films. I only have one that I still have in my collection. I used to have a lot. Over years, some of the lean years when Back to the Future was not as popular, I had to sell some of my collection to pay the bills, to keep the website going. And so,
Yeah.
So I used to own all of the original Polaroid continuity shots for all three films.
Oh, wow.
That I got from one of the prop masters. And so I had to let those go several years ago, in one of the lean years that just had to pay the bills and had to sell those. So the only prop I still have to this day, and I don't have it here in Alabama, it's actually at the Hollywood Museum right now. There's a Back to the Future Hollywood Museum exhibit of props and costumes and collectibles at the Hollywood Museum. And so I've got a prototype of the 1885 Hill Valley map that was in the train station in part 3. So mine is not the actual map. Mine is a prototype. It's the only one known. There's only 2 known maps. There was the actual one they used in the film, and then my prototype that doesn't have all the aging on it. And it's missing when you see it in the film, there's a dotted line across Shonash Ravine. Mine is the earlier edition that is just blank. Actually, I'm sorry, it's reversed. Mine has the dotted line. The original has no line across it, because in the film they wanted to show that the bridge is completely gone. And so mine had a dot across it, show that it was planned. And on film it was going to show that it almost looked like it was a real a completed line. And so they scrapped that. So I've got the original one that has the dot across the unfinished bridge, and it doesn't have all the aging paint on it. But that actual prop is actually on display at that exhibit right now for the rest of this year, and probably on into next year. And then I've got a full-scale Marty McFly mannequin that is on display there, that I commissioned several years ago. That was Marty on part 2, riding the hoverboard on the water in part 2. And so I had an artist that actually worked on Jurassic Park, Nick Mara, was a special effects crew member, and he does commissions on these. I'd found out about some of the stuff he did on Jaws and some other things, and commissioned him to build this Marty for me several years ago. So the Marty McFly that you can see, life size of Michael J. Fox, is there, and then that map. So collectibles like that are things that I like. And I know I've got this filter on in my office, but I've got a full-sized standee of part 2 looking at me right now, and a standee of part 3 over in the corner here.
You should let us see it. Come on.
Oh, let me see if I can do my camera around. I don't know if yeah. So.
Oh, nice.
And there's the part 3 over in the corner.
Cool.
But I've got a lot of memorabilia in my office. I got a lot of autographs on the walls. I've got a few autographs. There's one. There's one from Tom Wilson to the website.
Do you plan on keeping these or passing on to the next generation, or selling them, or what's your plan?
You know, I do sell stuff out of my collection from time to time. I'm getting old, and so I'm actually looking at an end game of stepping aside at some point in the next few years, and letting somebody else run the site at some point. But yeah, you know, 30. I've been doing it 30 years now, and I'm a grandfather now, and I still work. I'm in a part-time role at the university where I work now, and so
Sure.
time marches on, and you know but yeah, you know, my kids are not interested in this, and so my wife is certainly not interested in it. So but
Sure.
it takes up a lot of the garage, it takes up a lot of the house, and so
Time too, right? So
oh yeah. So a lot of time.
I can imagine that. You know, talking about memorabilia, one thing I've always find, I'm sure you would do this too from time to time. eBay always was the place to be at to find stuff,
Right.
but now Facebook Marketplace. You know, like if I would go to Facebook Marketplace and type in Back to the Future, you'll find Marty McFly's jacket, the Lego, DeLorean, like the different versions of it. So that's a pretty cool place to buy stuff that is not out there anymore, right? The old stuff.
You know, that's something I've not really looked into. I mean, I'm aware of Facebook Marketplace, but I've never gone on there looking for any collectibles.
It's used stuff, right? It's not brand new,
yeah, right?
It's that
right.
like if you're like a hardcore collectible, like, you know, you would probably do that. One of the things I've noticed, I don't know if it happens with Back to the Future and what's the license. Well, obviously there's a license involved.
Right.
I recently discovered this. If you go on Instagram, there is a bunch of Jurassic Park fans that have like ridiculous amount of memorabilia. So there are these companies based in Europe, Asia, especially I think Japan, which actually make. Remember that probably still around Sideshow Toys. That company.
Oh, Sideshow, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember back in late 90s or early 2000s, they came up with a Jurassic Park, the ending scene where the raptors attack.
Okay.
It's like a small miniature about this high, like,
Right,
but it's done really authentically. So I thought that was the only one that existed. But I discovered these guys on Instagram, they have shelves of different scenes from Jurassic Park, and they've been done like, obviously they must have had license and stuff. I'm wondering why didn't Back to the Future go in that direction? You know, there's so many memorable moments that
you know, initially Universal just did not license the IP for merchandise back when the films were out, and there was some, you know, part 2 came out and there was a remote control DeLorean. I've got one up on the shelf somewhere behind me. The part 2 had some memorabilia that was licensed. It was not a whole lot. Part 1 had very, very little. Part 3 had very little, but part 2 had some. When Back to the Future Ride came about, obviously they started doing a lot more licensing to have things that you could buy. You know, Marty's rainbow cap, lots of different T-shirts and stuffed Einstein dogs and all kinds of things you could buy at the gift shops. Over time, the Back to the Future IP has become really big in terms of licensing, and it continues. Just 2 years ago, the 35th anniversary was the biggest year for merchandise ever. There were so many things that came out. NECA came out with their action figures. I've got a few. These are the ones that are about to come out. Doc Brown, let me put it in front of my face.
Right there, yeah. Oh, well, nice.
This one is only available in Europe right now. It's coming out soon. And there's a Griff that was only available at Target.
Who is that? Is that
Griff Tannen?
Oh, Griff. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really hard to see with the packaging. But,
yeah, it's the background. But how much are these going for in Europe?
Between $33 and $35 each.
That's not
so
bad.
we sell those on the website through backtothefuture.store. And so NECA came out with a number of those 2 years ago. Funko came out with a number of pops. Super 7 came out with some action figures. There was a lot of material, a lot of collectibles that came out 2 years ago. Playmobil is a company I've worked with. Playmobil came out with a DeLorean. They come out with some play sets. They've still got some more that are planned for either later this year or early next year. And so there's a lot of play sets, a lot of collectibles that, and that's how a lot of kids are discovering Back to the Future now, is that you going through Walmart and seeing a DeLorean and go, what's that? Well, and discovering the toys before they discover the movies.
You're absolutely right, because my son, he knows about DeLorean.
Yeah.
Because of the Back to the Future. That's the first thing. And he wants to watch the movies, and we're probably going to watch it sometime during Christmas time and the holidays coming. But yeah, the kids, they know because of the cars, they know about DeLorean, especially boys. Boys.
Okay.
Yeah. And I feel that one thing with the Back to the Future, a lot of stuff that's coming back, right? Like all the stuff that Spielberg produced in the 80s, they're coming back. Like Animaniacs came back. I don't know if you remember the Tiny Toons is supposed to coming back. They were working on I don't know if it's a series. I read about this few days last week. They've been trying to make a sequel to Goonies for a long time.
Right. I have followed.
But now what they're doing is way back in the early 2000s. Remember Frame by Frame Raiders of the Lost Ark came out by a group of fans that got recognized.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
I forgot what it was called, but I remember that.
I forget the name too, but so that idea, they're gonna make a series on Goonies where a group of fans recreate Goonies.
Oh, okay.
Frame by frame. So there's all that stuff happening, right? Is there any kind of, and I know the sequels will never happen, neither do I want any kind of sequels or remake or anything, but something that gives a rebirth to the Back to the Future franchise.
Well, the Back to the Future musical. The musical is
okay. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So Back to the Future musical debuted in Manchester, England 2 years ago, and it was debuting. It had just launched maybe 3 weeks when COVID hit, and then they had to shut it all down. And it moved to London later that year, and then it had to be shut down again, but it is still in London. So they are actually getting ready to have a cast change in a week and a half. There's a new cast getting ready to come on. Most of them were under contract for, I think, 2 years. And so their contracts are up, and a lot of them are not renewing their contracts, a lot of the actors. But so they've got a cast change in London.
Right.
At the same time, it is moved. They keep calling it a transfer to the U.S. It's not transferring. It's just there's going to be a Back to the Future musical on Broadway in 2023. I've got the soundtrack. Let me see if the soundtrack was. Yeah, the soundtrack shows.
Oh, nice.
So this is the score. This is the soundtrack to the musical in London. And it's about to come out on LP in a couple more months. But this is the original cast recording for the musical. So that is really where a lot of people are getting their Back to the Future kicks right now, is traveling to London and seeing the musical. And
have you seen it?
I personally have not seen it yet. So I've not been able to go, and thankfully it's coming to New York City next year, and so I will be seeing it next year for the first time. But I've been involved with promotion of it from this side, through our Twitter account, through the website, and all. Have been promoting it for quite some time and carrying the soundtrack and some things like. There's a new book coming out in October, and so called Create. I think it's called Creating the Back to the Future musical. It's written by Michael Clastorin, who wrote some of the most recent Back to the Future reference books. Michael was the unit publicist on part 2 and part 3. And
Right.
he wrote the original trilogy book back in 1990. And then he's done, I don't think I have his book sitting here where I can reach it. No, I don't. But he's come up, he's written several books. He wrote, you may have seen the Spielberg Close Encounters of the Third Kind book that came out a couple of years ago. That's the same author.
Okay.
Big, thick reference book on Close Encounters. He did Back to the Future trilogy, and then they came out with an updated version of the book a couple of years ago. And so, but he has written this one that's on the musical that comes out. I've not seen it yet, but Michael's a good close friend, and he's very thorough in his coverage of things like that. But the Back to the Future musical, it is that reboot, I guess. It is what people are going to see, that honors the first film. It only covers the first film.
Okay.
And so there are no intentions of doing anything beyond the films. You know, there was a comic book series for a number of years that started in 2015 that ran
I
up
saw it on your
until,
website.
yeah, it ran through last year. There were some crossovers with Transformers and some other things. I think the comic book, I don't know of any plans to revive the comic books right now. I think it has run its course for now. But there was a number of issues, many issues that I carried. Still have a lot of back issues on. But IDW was the publisher for those.
Sure. What about an animated series?
So there was an animated series in
back in the 90s.
Yeah, back in the 90s. There was a comic book adaptation of those episodes that was run by Harvey Comics. But other than that, in the comic book series that was revived in 2015, there's nothing really ongoing beyond the musical. And I know a lot of people have been to the musical, and and if you just look on Twitter, I mean, there's people daily that go to see it and just rave that it's the best musical adaptation of a film they've ever seen. It's won all kinds of awards over in the UK, and we fully expect it to win Tony Awards when it comes out over here next year. So,
it must be really good, because in UK, and not to undermine US in any way, the theater work is very much more appreciated than it's done over here. So they must obviously notice something, not just being Back to the Future fans. So that's exciting. I'm kind of looking forward to that now. It's coming out summer next year or spring?
I do not know the exact dates. I've heard different reports, but they have not announced yet when in 2023 it's coming out. But it is definitely headed to Broadway in 2023 and other markets as well. I know that there are other countries they plan on taking it to as well. None of them have been announced yet, but I know Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis and Alan Silvestri are all behind it. They are all involved with it. And so, Alan Silvestri has been involved with the music behind it. He wrote several new pieces of music specifically.
Oh, nice.
Glenn Ballard is involved with it. There's just a lot of really big names that are involved with the musical. And they've been talking about a Back to the Future musical. The very first time I heard Bob ever say anything about it was back in 2004 at a DeLorean car show. And he's had it in the planning stages before he ever publicly said anything about it. But it took about 15 years to bring it to the stage, and they wanted to do it right. And so they're very proud and very pleased with the turnout how it's come about, and the actors who portray Marty and Doc and Biff and Lorraine and George and Jennifer all are, very hailed on the theater stage. The actor who does George McFly, they say that he steals the show, but his contract is about up, and so he won't be at the London production much more beyond our discussion today. I think his last day is August 15th, something like that.
Okay.
So
what
most of the cast are moving on to other productions, and they're recasting those roles. Roger Bart, who plays Doc Brown, I think he is the only one who is staying on for another contract, and so
sure.
They've raved about him. And so you can see some videos on the Back to the Future musical website, which is backtothefuturemusical.com.
Yeah.
I do not run that. That is a production by the people who run the musical, and so I do collaborate with them on promotions from time to time through Twitter and all. But there's a lot of video out there of music videos of all the cast, and I'm excited about it. I'm very excited to finally get to see it next year. So I had initial plans to travel to go see it, but I started learning that they were going to bring it to Broadway. So I just kind of put off traveling abroad. And COVID has just not been easy to kind of maneuver around either. So I've just decided to stay put here in the U.S. and let them bring it to me instead of me go to them.
Yeah, no, I mean, hopefully things are a little bit easing up with COVID, but I always thought about, and I don't know if it's possible because of the time traveling story, with Indiana Jones, they came out with Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. I don't know if you ever saw.
Right.
I
did.
Yeah, Indy being young and all that, but because of the time factor, you can't do that with Marty McFly if you were to do that.
Right.
But do you see any chance, not like next 5 years, but in 10, 15 years, having some sort of a series maybe of like brand new?
I think anything is possible. Anything like that, any kind of extension of the franchise has to have the blessing of Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, and which the musical did. They were heavily involved, and they are still, particularly Bob Gale. Bob Gale is called the gatekeeper. He pretty much everything goes through him for any kind of big merchandise or any kind of event or any production like that. So the Hollywood Bowl is actually doing the Back to the Future in concert series this weekend, and I know Alan Silvestri will be there, and probably some of the other cast members will be there as well. I haven't heard specifics, anybody specifically that's going to be there, but that I actually did that here in Nashville a couple of months ago. I had been waiting for it to come to the Southeast, and so what the in concert series is you actually go to a symphony hall and watch the movie on a big screen, but all of the music has been stripped out of the movie, and a big orchestra plays all the music live while you're watching the movie. And they started that in 2015, and I just kept missing it. Every time it would come anywhere near, it was not something that I could get away and go to, but it came to Nashville, Tennessee a couple months ago, and I got to see it. My wife and I went, and It was quite an experience. I really enjoyed it, and I got to see a few fans from the South there in attendance as well. And but the Hollywood Bowl is actually doing it in Hollywood this weekend, 2 nights. And so I know Alan Silvestri is supposed to be there, and he wrote some new sequences of music for the concert series. And so there's things like that that are approved by Gale and Zemeckis. I say, right now I know of no plans whatsoever that of extending the series beyond anything like the musical or the concert series. But I, never say never. I know that there's not any plans for any more films.
Yeah.
And if somebody came up with a clever idea for a streaming series for NBC's Peacock, which is part of Universal,
Yeah.
if somebody came up with some radical great series or that was a spinoff, I know I would enjoy it, but I know Bob and Bob have no plans to allow that to happen anytime. They say that there can't be any film series, any reboots or remakes or sequels in their lifetime. But for the longest, and you remember my website in the early days, I was a big proponent for Back to the Future 4. I wanted it.
I remember that.
But over the years, I've come to respect, and I respect Bob's wishes, and so that's not anything that I push for anymore. But if they came up with some kind of great idea for a series that was based on something to do with Back to the Future, I would fully support it, but it would have to be something that had the blessing of Bob and Bob.
Yeah.
What
about Universal, which is a company that did Back to the Future, is coming out with the Jaws and E.T. IMAX release this month and next month.
Yeah.
How about Big Back to the Future and IMAX would be but the problem with that is it's 3 movies, right? So how do you do that? Yeah. Is there any plans for that?
I've not heard of any plans. I would not be surprised. I mean, they would have to strike a new master for IMAX use. I don't think any of the things that they've got now could play on IMAX to take advantage of the IMAX cameras, and projection. But I don't know anything that would prevent them from doing that. I just don't know of any plans that Universal or Amblin has for that. So
great. Stephen, if you don't, do you have to go, or you have some time?
No, we're good. We're good.
Okay. So I just had a couple of more questions, and I want to bug you again because silly me, didn't press the record button.
Okay.
I just have like 3 questions from the beginning that I would like to do again, if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, but what? So there's a whole series that I don't know if I saw that episode of Movies That Made Us. Were you in it?
Yeah.
Were you in it?
I am not in that particular one. I was aware of it. There's been a lot of things like that. So there's several documentaries. I am in one of the documentaries called
Back in Time,
Back in
right?
Time. So that one occasionally runs on Hulu and Netflix. It was available on Blu-ray and DVD. I've got some old. I've got a large stash of the Blu-rays. If anybody wanted to buy it on physical disc, I've got it. But it does stream from time to time on Hulu and Netflix. Yeah. I've been involved in a lot of different documentaries, mostly behind the scenes. But I did appear on the Back in Time one. But sure. I was working with. I can't remember if it was that particular one, the Movies That Made Us. There was another one, the one on Discovery that Christopher Lloyd was in search of the screen-used DeLoreans that came out. They kind of helped launch Discovery Plus. I guess it was last year. It was a 4-part series. And so I was involved with that particular one, not from a credited standpoint or anything, but I was working with a production company on that particular documentary. And if you haven't seen that one is really hilarious.
What is it called?
It's called Expedition Back to the Future. So it's Josh, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, that does the whole Expedition series on Discovery. When they launched Discovery Plus streaming service, they ran that, and so a lot of the props.
Josh Gates.
I'm sorry.
Josh Gates. Sorry.
Yes, Josh Gates. Yeah. So Josh did a 4-part series on Discovery Plus in search of the screen-used DeLoreans. And so a lot of my friends that I know from this whole experience and this whole expedition of mine, Bill and Patrick Shea, who live in up in the Boston area. They own a lot of the screen used DeLoreans and vehicles and props and costumes. And some of the props and costumes that I previously owned are now in their collection. But Christopher Lloyd and Bob Gale and a lot of the cast were involved in that, but it was primarily Christopher Lloyd and Josh Gates in search of the screen used DeLoreans. And so it was a 4-episode series. And it is probably it's probably the funniest thing Christopher Lloyd has done in 25 years. It is absolutely hysterical and it's very well written and acted. And again, I know a lot of these folks. And so when they show up on screen, James Tolkien is there and Don Fullilove and so many others but it's just a very funny sketch series that they did, and you get to see a lot of the props and costumes. So I was involved with some of that behind the scenes and helping connect them, helping the production company at Discovery get connected with a lot of the collectors and a lot of the fans and where some of these pieces were, and they shot a lot of different things.
Sure.
And so I don't like seeing my face on. I'm not even enjoying seeing my face right now. But I like being the puppeteer behind the curtain, pulling the strings. And so I'm more of a behind the scenes kind of guy instead of being the guy out front.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I don't want to go into too much of this because there's so much stuff out there already. That how the film had a different name before. Was it? Right. Something from outer space. What was it?
Well,
Universal proposed that idea. I know.
Yeah. It was one of the head honchos at MCA Universal did not like the name Back to the Future, and from the earliest script, it had always had the name Back to the Future, and once they got in production, he did not like the name Back to the Future. He wanted the name to be changed to Spaceman from Pluto. That was actually on a comic book, and you see at the very first scene in 1955 when the DeLorean crashes into the barn and the young boy and the farmers come out and start shooting at the spaceman and the spaceship, and it says Spaceman from Pluto on the comic book, and he liked that as a title and wanted it changed. And so Bob were neat, they were full in production at the time, and they went to Spielberg and said, we don't know what to do here. He wants us to change the name, and Spielberg said, hey, I know exactly what to do. So Spielberg wrote up a memo and replied back to Sid and said, hey, thank you for that joke you sent us. We all laughed so much. So that was just so funny. Thank you. We needed our spirits lifted and everything. And they said the word was that he was too embarrassed to go back to say that he was serious about it. And so he let it drop, and they got to keep the name Back to the Future. So
no, I know that story, but I just wanted to sort of have that mentioned for the
and it's in Michael Clastorn's book. You can actually see the memo that was sent from Universal to them. You can actually see that actual memo.
It's great that how Spielberg tackled that, right? Like anybody else would have been like, well, we're not doing this, there'd be like a big fight, but I guess he had that intuition to do that. So let me just go back to 3 questions. You don't have to go into super detail with them.
Okay.
You don't have to repeat it the same way. So just kind of what your story of how you got involved in Back to the Future.
Okay, so my story goes back to being just a fan from day one, watching the film at the theater and enjoying, a good popcorn adventure at the theater. But I was not really, nothing really clicked with me until a year later when Starlog magazine did a story on Back to the Future as it was coming out on VHS. And so Bruce Gordon's article, his essay called The Other Marty McFly, was a story that I just by chance caught thumbing through a magazine in my local bookstore, Starlog Magazine 108
Yep,
from
I remember that.
July of 1986. And it blew my mind because it mentioned several things in there that I did not notice the two times that I had seen Back to the Future in theaters. And so I had to rush out and go rent Back to the Future. You know, this is back before sell-through video. And so to own a copy of Back to the Future was $79.95. And so most people didn't buy movies back
Because
then.
I remember even when the DVDs used to come out on VHS, first it would come out for rent. I mean, even now with iTunes, like, you know, first it would come out with rent. And
Right.
you can't buy something for like at least 6-7 months, right?
Right,
Like
right.
now the time window is so small. Back then it used to be almost a year.
Yes, yes. So
But go on.
it was a long time before most people could afford to buy a copy of Back to the Future. So I went out and rented it and sat down with my then fiance, frame by frame by frame by frame by frame, trying to catch all these details with, you know, the clock tower ledge being broken at the end of the movie, but not broken at the beginning of the movie. And but particularly this fleeting glimpse of a person in the background at the beginning of the parking lot scene with the DeLorean traveling through time. The theory was in this article was that it was Marty from the end of the film arriving at the beginning, and even though no time travel had taken place yet. But that was not Bob Gale's plan. It was just a crew member or somebody walking in the distance. But you can actually see some movement at the moment Doc Brown throws his pistol to the ground and holds his hands up not to be shot. You can see somebody in the background walking. And so that the crux of that article was that that was Marty McFly. And so that's what kind of kickstarted me off into this genre and wanting to be read everything and consume everything that I could. You know, this was before the internet. You know, back in those days, we didn't have email. We didn't have any way to consume anything from our favorite films other than. Do you remember E Entertainment television? But before before it was called E, it was called Movie Time. And it was a channel that just showed trailers to upcoming movies 24 hours a day and had some movie news and things like that from time to time. So it was catching Movie Time and Starlog and maybe a few other magazines. And that's how we got our information. I discovered working before I worked in higher ed, I discovered a BBS. You remember the old bulletin board systems that you could go on?
Yes.
And CompuServe and things like that. So I met some people during the time that parts 2 and part 3 was coming out just by chance. And I'm still connected with a few of those people today, which was really interesting. But that's how we kind of consumed leaks and things about our upcoming movies we couldn't wait to see. So, you know, Back to the Future in parts 2 and part 3 were filmed consecutively back to back. They were in production for both movies for 11 months. And so most people didn't know when part 2 came out that it was a cliffhanger. And me included. I knew that part 3 was coming, but I didn't know part 2 ended on a cliffhanger. And so when part 2 ended on a cliffhanger and we saw the trailer for part 3, I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to survive for another 6 months for part 3 to come out?
Really? They came out 6 months apart? I didn't know that.
They came out six months apart. So part 2 came out in November of 89 and part 3 came out in May of 90. So part 2 came out on VHS the day before part 3 came out in theaters. And
that's a smart marketing tactic.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, for me, following that progression, but then going to Universal Studios Florida and riding on the Back to the Future of the ride, that's what really kicked it up a notch. And you know, I've mentioned to you before that I came from that experience wanting video footage from the Back to the Future ride. But for me personally, that was my Back to the Future Part 4. And so many cold calls to Universal Studios over the course of the year in 1992 led me to meet Bob Gale, be transferred to his office because he was still working on the Back to the Future cartoon series on the back lot at that time. And so I met Bob Gale almost 30 years ago. October would be 30 years ago that I met him. And so I've been friends with Bob ever since, and been working with him on different capacities, different projects, different toys, and just different little projects over the years. And he's a really close friend.
And then you started the website in the 90s, right? That's around the same time.
Oh yeah, so I started the website with Bob's assistant in 92 introduced me to a gentleman who lived in California who had just started an unofficial fan magazine, a fan club, and he was only like 2 issues in when I hooked up with him. And he and I joined forces in the late 90s, late 92, and started publishing what was called the Hill Valley Telegraph. It was a kind of a fanzine that I took over all the publishing. He was doing it on a typewriter. And I'm a computer guy, I'm an old school programmer, and I was doing a lot of desktop publishing at the time. And so I took over all the publishing of that little newsletter that we mailed out to about 500 people at the peak of that.
Wow.
We interviewed all the cast and crew, and Michael J. Fox and Leah Thompson and Tom Wilson and Bob Gale and Neil Canton, and just a lot of different people. What's interesting, I look back in those days, I met Peyton Reed. Peyton Reed is the director of all 3 Ant-Man movies and several other big Hollywood movies. I interviewed Peyton back in the 90s because he worked on the Back to the Future ride and the Back to the Future animated series. So Peyton got his start on doing documentaries and working on some of these things and these TV shows in the 90s. He also directed the first season of the Back to the Future animated series. He also directed the entire first season of the Weird Al Yankovic show. And so I've known Peyton for a very long time. And so thrilled to see him be so successful with the Marvel series that he's now doing with Ant-Man. But yeah, I started doing the website after about 3 years of doing the newsletter, because it was a lot easier to publish news. And I did a website that kind of morphed from just a dial-up internet account to a website that was unofficial to now the official website that Universal recognizes as the official website for the IP. And every 5 years when there's new product to come out from the home video wing, I get to promote that through the website.
That's so cool, man.
So
that's so cool.
I don't know what you call me. I'm I'm just this guy that started out as a fan, and now I'm doing all this official stuff for the same IP that I've been a fan of for 37 years. But I don't know that there's any kind of official title or what you call that.
I would call it a very unique title that doesn't exist, because it is like, if you think about it, like when we started back in the late 90s with the websites, it's on Spielberg and DreamWorks and you on Back to the Future. It's, if you think, like, I remember, I'm probably the same thing with you, like that was like aside from school, that was my life.
Oh yeah.
Like that's it. Like that's all I did. Even during my university breaks, like if I had like a 3-hour break, I would literally be in the lab updating. Yep. And it's not something that is around anymore, because back then hosting wasn't cheap. Like to have your own.
Not.
I remember I used to pay. I had a dedicated server. I used to pay about $400 a month.
Yep, I did too.
And now it's like not even anything close to that.
No, yeah. That's what I told you earlier about me having to sell some of my props and collections, because the server cost to have a dedicated server, and I did that as well. It was astronomical, and and high-speed internet to my house here in Alabama was not cheap either. I had satellite was the best I could get for the longest until AT&T came up with UVerse and dropped it tremendously down. But those days are.
I made a decent amount of money because of the server costs and everything. There were ads and there was like Amazon, but it wasn't that great. But I remember remember AI, Spielberg's film, Artificial. Yeah. So it didn't do well at the movie theater. And when it came out, I just as a fan went on eBay and I bought these Japanese poster books of AI. Like they were like 10 pages. It was about yay big. Yeah. And it was all Japanese written on. And I bought like several of them, just not with any kind of business thing in my mind.
Right.
When the movie came out on DVD in October and November, I just put it up on eBay and I spent like $20 on each of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they each got sold for about $1,000.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't expecting that. Right. So there's all that kind of stuff that you have to do. And going on to the next two more questions, buddy. We'll talk about the resonation, like why do people resonate with today, and the ride experience. So we have about 10 minutes before my camera runs out of memory card. So let's just do 5 minutes if you can. That'd be great.
Okay. So why it resonates with audiences today? Bottom line is it's the story. People want to. People love the adventure of seeing their parents back when they were in high school, and all of the actors involved, the writers, the story is it's a solid story. Back when it was in theaters, everybody loved Michael J. Fox because he was on television, on NBC every week. He was a household name. Everybody loved Michael and still do to this day. And it was just one of these. It was lightning in a bottle. I mean, it was literally all these different elements came together for the story, the production, the car, the actors. I mean, everything all together. And it's just one of those things that everybody they love today. They love just every aspect of it. So,
yeah. And I think also, like you said, story, and unfortunately, I don't know, maybe our parents' generations had the same thing when we were growing up, but I find it's a little bit different now. Story is like is something that's focused in the end, as opposed to
with some exceptions. I mean, one of the things I'm following, I'm one of these who never watched Breaking Bad. But I've been watching Better Call Saul, and it's just about to come to an end. And
I saw the latest episode last night.
Yeah, so it is. I mean, that is really good writing, and
100%
having all the same people involved for both series, and so I'm kind of watching it in chronological order. So once Better Call Saul ends in a couple of weeks, then I'll start watching Breaking Bad.
Oh, you haven't seen Breaking Bad yet?
I've not seen Breaking Bad. I've seen a few episodes out of order years ago, but I did not follow it. So, but story is everything. And Back to the Future is so tightly woven together with a continuous story throughout all three films. We talked about family. Family is key. It's so important. Yes. Friendship is so important, and it's just everybody can resonate with family and friends, and it's just this tightly knit story in this little fictional town of Hill Valley that we all have grown to love, and the characters involved. And for me, it's such a surreal thing now. I'll tell you this, try to make it real quick. Several years ago, for the 20th anniversary of Back to the Future, we did a screening in Hollywood at the ArcLight. And Christopher Lloyd and Leah Thompson and Claudia Wells and Tom Wilson, several of us were there for that screening. And I was promoting it from here in Alabama on BTTF.com and sold out two screenings of it. They had to do a second one because it was so popular. But being there with them for that event and sitting in the audience with, I sat with Tom Wilson. We're real close friends. I sat in the audience with Tom Wilson, watching Back to the Future, watching him perform, and he's sitting right here beside me. That is such a surreal experience. A year later, I did the very same thing with Christopher Lloyd, seeing parts 2 and 3 at the Chinese Theater, Man's Chinese Theater.
Yeah,
there.
Chinese Man's Theater. Yeah.
And so we called it the double back screening. It was back-to-back screenings of parts 2 and part 3. And Chris wanted to sit in the audience, and he sat one row behind me. And I knew a lot of stories about part 3 from Tom. And so Tom's favorite that he filmed was part 3. And he had told me all these things behind the scenes, that jokes and things that he used to cut up with Chris Lloyd. And so I kind of sat with my eyes and was watching Chris Lloyd enjoy part 3 and grinning and laughing out loud to things that I knew happened behind the scenes on a particular scene with he and Tom Wilson.
That's interesting.
And so it's just kind of those kinds of, but it's for me as a fan to be able to get this relationship with the cast and the crew and go on this long adventure with them, and to have these surreal event experiences at screenings and Comic-Cons and location events and things like that. It's just, I can't describe it. Words don't adequately describe the joy it brings for somebody like me. But
no, I'm sure, man. I completely get it. And going back to what you were saying about story, I hadn't seen Breaking Bad when it came out, and I saw it 3 years ago, and I was like, and then I saw Better Call Saul, and then I saw Breaking Bad again whenever I'm traveling.
Oh,
wow. Like, I'm sitting on the plane, and just because it's the writing and the way it's shot. I mean, you can literally watch those 2 shows and learn so much about the art of storytelling, right? And that's what's, with the exception of some cases, that's what's missing nowadays. Like that story of, like the Goonies, Poltergeist, even movies like Beverly Hills Cops and all this stuff in the 90s and the 80s that came out. They were just about people, and the way you remember a great story is if the characters are written really well, which is the case in Back to the Future.
Oh yes,
because people, when you start calling Michael J. Fox Marty McFly or Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown, then you got the characters nailed down, right?
Yeah.
So, but I genuinely miss that. That's why I watch a lot of old stuff now, and I'm probably going to watch Back to the Future. I'm going to order the 4K and watch it again.
Yeah.
It's been a while. So one more thing about the rides. They closed back. There were some. I visited Universal Studios in 2001, and I visited all the rides. Like I went mainly for Jurassic Park, but I went to Jaws. I don't think Jaws was open at the time. No, it wasn't. Jurassic Park, Backdraft. But the 2 that resonated with me the most were E.T., which they shut down, and Back to the Future was my best experience.
Yeah.
Why did that happen? And do you think there's any plans for opening? Because it was, even to this day, if you put that in a park, I think it beats all the roller coaster rides, to be honest.
I agree. I mean, there's been rumors over the years of them bringing something Back to the Future back. Down in Orlando, Universal's about to open another park. It's called Epic Universe. I think it opens in 2025, but they have not announced all of the attractions for that park yet. So, deep down, I have my fingers crossed that there's going to be something Back to the Future there, but I'm not privy to anything that's coming there. But no, I think over time, Universal there was just a regime change, a leadership change at the parks, and they just came in and evaluated what attractions at that time were getting the most footwork and butts in the seats. And I think it'd been a while since Back to the Future had any kind of refurbish. I know the last time before they closed them in 2007, I had been there in 2006.
Sure.
And there was a tear in one of the screens, and it had just run down. They had allowed it to dissipate, and they just decided that they would close the Back to the Future ride and retrofit it for something else. And they brought in 20th Century Fox's Simpsons. And, it still got the same mechanics behind it. They just reprogrammed the vehicles and filmed. And there's actually an homage to Back to the Future in the Simpsons attraction. Doc Brown is actually in. Doc Brown, voiced by Christopher Lloyd, is actually in the Simpsons attraction in the pre-show, and he talks about things had gotten bad, and he had to sell his garage, and I think had to sell the DeLorean and all that, and so to fund some other time travel experiments. But it was just business. Universal just decided to close those attractions at all three of the Back to the Future parks, and both of them were closed in 2007 in the U.S. and the last one I think in 2010 or 2011 in Japan. But now they are opening an escape room and City Walk in Universal Orlando later this year. They've not released any details about it. They did. There've been a lot of rumors about it, and I've been hearing. I know a few employees who work at the parks, and they were telling me things that they're hearing Back to the Future was making a comeback. But it's an escape room that I think it. And I don't know enough about it at this point. They've only announced that there's a Jurassic World and Back to the Future escape room. I don't know if it's two separate escape rooms or one together. I'm not exactly sure what. But I'm hopeful that they're got the right people working on the Back to the Future side of the house on that to make that something that'll last several years. But who knows if that's popular enough? That could certainly spawn Universal to rethink that and maybe bring a new ride at some point back. I mean, whether it's a roller coaster or another simulator ride or what have you. I mean, I would love it's good for my business when Back to the Future is thriving at the theme parks. But
imagine if they had a roller coaster in the shape of DeLorean.
Oh yeah, and I've seen some concepts, some fan concepts of that stuff before. There's I think it would be well welcomed. It's just theme parks are made to make money, and they have to keep their attractions on the cutting edge. And Back to the Future was cutting edge when it came out in 1991, but 15 years later, it was no longer considered cutting edge anymore, and so they just decided to repurpose that building with something else. And
I absolutely miss Back to the Future ride.
I do too.
You sit in 2 or 3 rows of seats and a gigantic screen, and you literally feel like you're in that moment.
Yeah, they called it. They actually marketed it called Ride the Movies, and so it really was. Yes. It was one of those where you could ride the movie, and it really felt like you were part of that attraction. You were part of Hill Valley, and getting to travel to 2015 and back to the time of the dinosaurs. It was ahead of its time at the time, and I wish that the parks would bring something back, because Back to the Future is just as popular as ever now. And
I agree, man. And one last question, Stephen.
Sure.
Besides, I mean, Robert Zemeckis is a genius filmmaker. Like, aside from Spielberg, and I think he's really up there for me. The way I loved Back to the Future films, but for me, when he sort of, he became a totally different filmmaker. I shouldn't say totally different filmmaker, but he took on something different. That when Spielberg did Schindler's List, he did, I think, a year later, Forrest Gump. And then he did Contact, which is one of my favorite movies.
Oh yeah, I love
right. What do you like with the most of his, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit or Castaway, What Lies Beneath?
So many of those. Funny you mentioned that. Death Becomes Her was on just last night, and it had been years since I've watched Death Becomes Her, and that was the movie that he did right after the Back to the Future trilogy. So that was the first one he did,
1991.
And so I really enjoyed that. But Forrest Gump is one of those. Anytime it's on, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to watch it. Contact is another one of those. I love Contact. I tell you one that does not get enough love from audiences and did not at the time and still to this day is What Lies Beneath.
I agree.
What Lies Beneath is a fantastic thriller with Harrison Ford.
Yeah, especially the ending sequence in the washroom.
Oh yeah,
the way the like one shot, like the camera goes around in a circle, and it was like psycho. It was literally, and then how the camera was underneath the floor when I think it was Michelle Pfeiffer or Harrison Ford characters fall on the ground. You see their perspective from underground.
Yes,
I mean, a lot of people complain that, and I talked about this to Cassine Gaines, the guy who wrote the book.
I know Cassine.
Yeah, a lot of people complained about the fact that how Castaway and What Lies Beneath, they came out the same year, summer and winter. Yeah. The trailers gave away everything, and when they questioned when they questioned Robert Zemeckis, and I had an issue with that too because they did, but when they questioned Robert Zemeckis and he explained it, I'm like, okay, it makes sense. He's like, the reason people go to movies is they want to know what's in the movies before they go there.
Yeah,
kind of like when you read a news headline, right?
Right.
And actually he was right because Castaway made a killer amount of money and What Lies Beneath did really, really well too. But anyways, fantastic, man. Thank you so much for your time, for being here.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
This was really cool. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did.
Me too. I'm glad we finally got to speak in person and see each other face to face. This has been, I wish you all the best of luck with your new podcast, your new ventures and the films that you're working on. I'd like to do this another time and learn about your story sometime.
Yeah, man, absolutely. 25 years later and we finally meet.
Yeah. I figure it's been long enough. We had to make this happen today.
All right, man. Thanks so much again, buddy. Well, I'll be in touch with you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Take care.
Right.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. And do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.